In the past, my chaotic good brain thought that it would be an interesting experience to fill my house with foster cats until I started actually fostering and realized that if I did fill my house with foster cats, they would just feel like they were still at the shelter because they weren't getting as much attention individually as they deserve. So that idea quickly went out the window. Still, I was curious about, what kind of rules they were about having, multiple, say, groups of cats, fostering multiple groups of cats. And it turns out that, it's not even really a good idea to, have multiple groups just kind of mingling together. At least, like, you would have to be really careful if you do. You would have to basically quarantine any new group of cats that you bring in, after you bring in an initial set of cats, or if you have, cats staying with you that are your cats, like they're not foster cats, and you bring in new cats, or, you have other pets, new dogs, you have dogs, and you bring in like foster cats, foster dogs, you should be quarantining them. Basically making sure that neither of them will have conditions that they'll give each other, particularly the foster cat that hasn't been in your house, so they haven't, shown you if they have any, lingering illness, so that's a big thing. If you bring in new animals after you've already have animals in your place for any amount of time, you really need to quarantine them, and that means having separate food, water, litter boxes, like, you sanitize those different food, water, litter boxes, and you keep the pet and their food, water, litter in a totally different space. So if you wanted to have like multiple like fosters coming in at different times, you'd basically be needing to live in a house where you had like multiple bedrooms, or somewhere where you had like multiple different, closed off rooms where you can keep a pet where, they're still comfortable, like you have toys in there, they're entertained enough. Cats need less, entertainment, so to speak, but they still need attention. So, you would want to ensure that, your house is capable of hosting multiple cats. And, if you live in an apartment, you guys see what rules they have about having so many, number of pets in your place. You have to pay a fee per pet, yada, yada, yada. So, you gotta really look into those things. And, basically, keep your cats quarantined for the first 2 weeks. Once, you've made sure they have no conditions, then it's usually safe to slowly allow the cats to mingle together with the residential cats. But yeah, like, as far as like a foster themselves and like how many cats like they can handle, you'll figure out your limit like a little bit after you have reached your limit. And then this is why communicating with your shelter or adoption coordinator regularly, the person who's like in charge of the foster cat's well-being, from whatever shelter or charity, you got to communicate with them regularly, so that if you're feeling like you're burning out, even if you just have like one foster cat and no like residential cats, you can still burn out, like for whatever reason. And you need to be consistently talking to your coordinator. So if you get to that point for whatever reason, you're able to communicate that, and they can send your cats to like a sitter for a bit, or, figure out what needs to be done to help you, not lose your stuff, like not lose your shit, basically. But yeah, also another thing that you should be communicating with, whatever shelter you're fostering with, is if your foster animal has any change of behavior. Like, you should be seeing the general pattern of behavior whatever foster cat has after, the first week or two at most, like living with that cat. And I'm sure most, if not all, of this applies to like dogs and other animals too that you foster. So if they do something, or especially they do a lot that, breaks from that regular behavior, you're able to, dial up your shelter like, hey, little Bobby's not doing so great, because, for example, the only sign with some cats that they have like a UTI, for example, is some change of behavior. Like, them actually like making a bunch of sounds, when they're trying to use the litter box, or they're using litter box less, quick fact, you should be feeding them wet food and dry food. The wet food is especially important to help prevent UTIs. So, little extra fact there that I learned, and now you learned too. But yeah, definitely communicate any changes in behavior that you notice. You don't have to like always watch them use the bathroom, and just like continue to live your life, give them the attention they want, and anything you notice that's out of the ordinary for them, you want to talk to the shelter. But yeah, on the other hand though, shelters can have like so many animals that, they really need fosters for, that it can be hard to, when they're asking for fosters for animals, and maybe they have like a long list, it can be hard to say no, especially if you really love animals and you want to take care of and protect all the animals, When the shelter needs help, it's really hard to be, it's really hard to turn away. Like, I never thought of myself as some huge animal fan. Like, I thought they were cute, but even when I get the emails from the shelter I work with, they're like, we need places for these cats, and I'll see cats that have been there for weeks looking for, a foster. It's hard. Like, luckily, my shelter specifically, I'm not sure how they do this, but they have like temporary fosters. So at least some of those cats, that have been waiting to be in a more permanent foster situation, they at least don't have to stay in the shelter too long. Again, like, I'm not sure how many, they're able to, like, how many cats they're able to help that way, but, maybe it's people who step up and say, like, I can take care of the cat, but, temporarily, like, until you find another foster, so they don't advertise when that kind of situation comes up. Like, the 2 bonded cats I have now, they were at a temporary foster, and, I didn't know that. I had assumed they were, in one of the shelter buildings until, I was able to raise my hand after Benjamin got adopted. And yeah, by the way, if I hadn't said already, Benjamin got adopted. But yeah, with my cats, with my new cats, Samuel and Preeti, like, they needed, like, they were at a temporary place, and that wasn't listed in the emails. But yeah, when I was like able to foster them, it was like, oh, they're with this temporary foster, which is really nice that people step up, and the shelter kind of helps give them even just a temporary place before they can find like a foster who has the full bandwidth to take care of the cat in question. So yeah, it's great. Yeah. All right. But yeah, especially if you don't have a big house to begin with, be really careful about, thinking about how many cats you can realistically safely foster. Um, and also, consider how long you might have the foster, because if it's an older cat, it might take longer for them to get adopted. Um, Also, with fosters, also with cats, like if they are, only at your place like temporarily while they heal from some surgery or, deal with an illness or something, like you probably need to quarantine them the whole time, but like you may only have them for like a month or 2 weeks or however long they need to like decompress after whatever operation. So, when you're thinking about like how many cats you can foster and like when, that's part of the consideration. Like, what cats are you fostering now, and how long do you expect them to, need to stick around? Like, if you're fostering young kittens, they're gonna get more easily adopted. And kind of, something that popped in my head, man, like these cats that I'm fostering right now, they're a bonded pair. I am not gonna let anybody, I'm not gonna let anybody adopt only one of them and leave the other. So I knew, taking them in, that like depending, I could hold on to them for a long time, because we're waiting for somebody willing to adopt both of them at the same time. They're a package deal. Like, one will refuse to leave without the other, So, and I'm happy for that. They're probably my favorite cats, I'll just say flat out, like, they are probably my favorite cats that I've fostered. And so I don't mind holding on to them until, somebody comes along who's actually willing to, adopt both of them together, because that's the only way, that can work. But yeah. All right. Also, if you were to, take in different cats at different times, even if the cat on paper, it has been seen to like get along with other cats, you never know when you'll have a situation where like two cats that meet each other just like human beings. Like, I try to be like as easygoing as possible and, go with the flow, but there are definitely people who rub me the wrong way. And like, cats are the same as any person, like there will be cats that rub them the wrong way. Cats are territorial, especially. So, you never know when you're in a situation where suddenly you have two cats that aren't getting along. And that's why it's so important to have, the space to separate any group of cat that you have from like other groups of cats. And again, it's super important to keep in contact with the shelter you're working with, the foster cats, in case it's becoming a situation where, like it's not, a good situation for the cats involved, because one of them's not getting along with the other to the point where one of them can't leave a room because, the other one will like, terrorize them. So yeah, like definitely communicate if you're running into that kind of situation. And also, if you have a lot of cats, no matter, what the situation is, as far as like how much, you have to quarantine them, like too many cats means like you don't have enough time or energy to give attention to the individual cats. It's like what I was saying at the beginning, like they'll just feel like they're at the shelter still if you have so many cats, and like that whatever individual cat is not getting enough attention from you. So, so yeah, you definitely, though, like, one of the reasons why the age of the cat specifically is important to consider here is because if you are fostering young kittens that were recently born, you definitely want to have them have at least one other kitten, with them, so they can socialize, so they develop those socialization skills, so they don't feel so alone or overwhelmed. Like, you definitely need to, pair kittens specifically together, because they're actually easier in pairs versus taking care of one kitten at a time. And like, there, some shelters even have rules where you should always have, any fosters you take in separated from any residential cats you have, probably to protect the health of both kittens, So, like, sometimes I'll call adult cats kittens, that's what my shelter does. But yeah, like, that can also come up. Also, while you're quarantining your cat, one thing you should definitely do if you're quarantining the cat is look at their poop. Like, you can use clump litter, but like, make sure that their poop looks pretty normal, like round, brown, clumps. Make sure there's no like blood or, white stuff like worms or anything else kind of popping up, because some illnesses that cats can get, one of the symptoms is, specific changes in poop. So yeah, you have to make sure that's not an issue. But yeah, like, even if the shelter allows you to have multiple fosters, you still need to quarantine them. All right, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed watching this. Also, comment down below, how many cats do you think you could foster at once, or would you want to foster at once, and, what you think that would be like. Yeah. Also, hi.